welcome to Unnamed Moffat Library podcast, whence we discuss library topics. My name is Chris.
And I'm Ryan Samuelson.
And we are happy to have you joining us today. Actually, we wanted to make some small talk because, I just had a promoted Nerdist article that was comparing Star Wars and Dune and everything that Star Wars ripped off. They made the comparison that the Sarlacc and the Sandworm were supposedly, the Sarlacc is a ripoff of the classic Dune Sandworm, and I'm not really seeing it. I mean, I always thought that it was just a mouth with like maybe some guts or something underneath it. You know, it seemed like a sand lion.
The original one, actually, a lot of people probably know it from the re-edited stuff by Lucas, where he actually put in a Venus flytrap-like mouth and stuff like that. The original gang was just a hole with a bunch of teeth in it.
Yeah, with just teeth, and then they added the stupid meowling worm monster, which was just a ridiculous addition.
I did read something that said that Frank Herbert himself thought that Star Wars was a ripoff of the original Star Wars, or as you millennials say, Episode 4, but still was a ripoff of Dune, and I think that has to do with the moisture farms and stuff like that.
Oh, yeah.
I think it's what he's saying.
Well, nothing to do with the fact that the primary location for most of the movie is a desert planet involving a chosen one who has to rebel against a galactic empire.
And he has to worry about the native sand people that are out there roaming the thing, and no one knows what their numbers are, and they always move in single file to hide their numbers. Yeah, he's probably Lucas borrowed a few things from
maybe a few things, except he didn't think too deeply about it, because comparing the sand people and the Fremen is like
yeah.
Plus,
he also borrowed from, as we all know.
Wow, okay. So apparently there's no protection against just cutting out teams. I was trying to change tabs to look at something in our library and completely closed the program. So thanks, Microsoft.
Although the original download, you do have it saved the original download, so it is there, so we didn't lose anything.
It's still there. There's going to be a weird edit, and for everyone who's wondering what's going on with that, that's my mistake.
And I may or may not leave that edit in, so let me pick up what I was saying. Well, again, Lucas borrowed from several other things like Hidden Fortress, Buck Rogers, World War II films, Dam Busters. The main plot of it is, at least at the end, is almost entirely taken from a movie called Dam Busters.
Dam Busters? I've never heard of this. I have heard of Hidden Fortress, though. You let me borrow a copy of the film.
The whole thing about them going in and blowing up the Death Star, that's taken almost directly from a movie about people trying to make runs on a hydroelectric dam in, I believe, well, I don't remember where it's at, but somewhere in the occupied territory of the Third Reich, basically.
Wow, okay, yeah. And he loves that World War II iconography and stuff.
Yeah, the gunners, when they're fighting the TIE fighters and all that type of stuff, yeah.
Yeah. And one of the reasons why I wanted to bring this stuff up is because, listeners, we have both of these in our library, and I think Hidden Fortress is actually on Canopy, one of our online databases. Mm-hmm. So if you're interested in checking those out, if you want to see what Dune's all about before the movie comes out, that's going to be on our third floor. We actually have 2 copies of it. It looks like we just got the most recent printing. And then Hidden Fortress is in our media collection as well, if you'd rather watch the DVD. That movie still looks incredible, by the way.
Yeah, it's considered one of the best movies of all time, basically.
Of all time, I would put it up there. Sure, that's the only Kurosawa movie that I've actually seen. So that's kind of a shame to admit that, but I plan on watching more. A whole lot of them are on HBO Max right now.
Yeah. I would suggest Rashomon and Seven Samurai, because everyone borrows from those two.
Oh,
so many films and TV shows and whatnot that have borrowed from those 2 films.
We have Rashomon in our library as well.
I believe we have almost all of Kurosawa main samurai films, I think, in our collection.
Not just the films. We have the short story that Well, it's weird. The short story of Rashomon is not. It's not the same. There's another short story that the film is based on. I think it's called like The Bamboo Thicket or something to that effect. The actual Rashomon story is quite a bit different, but that's neither here or there.
No.
This is how we pass a lot of our small talk, listeners. So
Talking about media, talking about movies, about TV, about books, about manga, about comic books. It's all literature. It's all part of libraries, and it's something that both me and Chris are very passionate about.
that's actually one of the assignments that I'm doing in my graduate program right now is just talking about how an information institute, that's what we're technically referred to as. Libraries and other depositories are information institutes. And the assignment right now is how have they impacted you? And one of the readings is that libraries aren't just a place to find books. We talked about this last time as well, but libraries are a big quotes, capital P place. It is a location that people can come and share their ideas and share their individual interests. That's kind of what the modern idea of a library is transforming into. So, how's your week been? This is gonna be awkward because we're recording this right after the last one, so it's more like how has the rest of your week been?
How's the rest of the week been? It's been busy here in the library. We've been getting a lot of people coming in asking questions. We covered quite a bit of that last. I'd say last week. It was actually yesterday that we recorded it. But yeah, a lot of people are asking questions. It was busy. I'm actually having problems trying to get a lot of my actual work done because I keep being interrupted. In fact, during the broadcast yesterday, I was interrupted twice. We'll see how I edited it together. We'll see if those cuts stay in or not. We'll see.
We might want to, just so we give people an idea of just how often we're being asked questions and asked for help. I mean, that's one of the biggest things we do here is just help people.
And as I mentioned last week, we're understaffed right now, so even when we're recording these, we're still probably going to have to do other things as well. We'll have to stop and deal with other distractions, I guess.
Unfortunately, this also means that we had to bump up our recording schedule. So it is 10 a.m. right now when we're recording, and I could not be any more tired. I just finished chugging my first cup of coffee for the day, and that'll kick in probably here in about 10 minutes. So if you notice me just embodying nervous energy, that's what that's about. But yeah, if we didn't record this early, every single one of these podcasts would be like that was yesterday, just constantly being interrupted and having to pick up where we left off because that's what we do. And that's kind of what we're expected of, like we need to drop everything to help people in the moment.
What's interesting is I know for a fact that half the listeners of this are going to be going 10 a.m. That's not really at all. The other ones are like, oh, I hear you, 10 a.m. Oh, that's just horrible. I'm
right in the middle of that. I don't know about you, but I was always a really late sleeper when I was younger, and that's gotten better since I started working here in particular. The last library I was at, I was more of a night person. But that's gotten better until the quarantine where I didn't have to get up at a specific time to start doing my work. And that has been quite an endeavor to get back into the swing of things.
What he's talking about is we were for about 3 months working from home.
Oh, was it 3 months?
It was at least 2. It was mid-March to mid-June?
Oh gosh, yeah, late June even.
I came in early June because my sleep schedule was so messed up. I kept staying up later, and it was getting harder and harder for me to get up in the morning. I had trouble sleeping, and my circadian rhythms were all messed up. So I started coming into work even though I wasn't supposed to yet. So just because I needed to reset my circadian rhythms so that I could actually be a human being that actually that's not at 3 a.m. going, hey, let's go do something,
Returning to humanness has been very difficult. What do we got on the docket this week?
I think today we're going to talk a little bit more about the movie madness type idea. And we might talk a little bit. I mean, we started this thing talking about cinema. We talked a little bit about the Dune film coming out. I think we can make maybe this one a little bit about cinema, a little about some of our ideas that we have as far as what we want to maybe come up with a list for social media about what videos or what movies we could do for Halloween.
Yeah, that sounds good. We're a strikingly film-focused library, I think. Aside from the fact that movie madness is like one of our big things, but even during our quarantine, one of the ways that we kept in touch, and I think over time it just became a group of like 4 or 5 of us, but we regularly held Netflix parties. We ended up watching the entire Indiana Jones filmography. I say that as if Indiana Jones is a real human, but we did that every week for a month straight, and I can tell you now exactly how I feel about those films. But it was our way of keeping in touch. You know, it was a very communal thing, and I think that's how film has kind of evolved here in our institution.
Although it's interesting because I have done several classes in conjunction with professors here on campus and stuff like that. And for me, I'm a little bit older, I'm Generation X. For me, film was always the big thing. It was the big American medium in which stories are told and stuff like that. What was interesting is going into these classrooms, and most of the students aren't approaching things from the point of film. They're approaching the topics and the ideas we're having from a medium of video games. And I've always put forth that probably in 10 years, they're going to start teaching video games at universities. When this generation goes out and gets their PhDs, we're going to suddenly see people talking about classes on The Last of Us.
Well, I hope not. That game is kind of mediocre, but oh, please send me emails telling me about how much you disagree with that statement. But no, that's actually something that I want to talk about with my own graduate program, is that libraries, I really do feel like they have an obligation to store and archive video games. That's a really big topic right now, not even in libraries, but just in the medium of video games, because at the moment, it's getting progressively more difficult to find a proper archival service for a lot of these old games. Like, you have companies like Nintendo who are creating these classical like recreations of old game consoles, but for example, one of them has, I think, like 50 titles on it with a catalog of thousands of video games. So what happens to all those that aren't being reprinted, recreated, or delivered in a way that can actually go to the consumers or people who are interested like in a historical aspect? And the general consensus is they're not. And for a lot of the game publishers, a lot of those older games were just thrown in the trash. That was a problem with Square Enix. They're talking about their old Final Fantasy games and re-releasing those, and for a while their message was, we threw them out. We threw away the code. We don't know. The only way for us to do something with these is to get a copy of the final product and just kind of reconfigure that. And that creates its own problems because some of those pieces of code are, they're necessary to preserve that title. We don't really have anything like a database or proper archival of video games. Not like we do movies, especially.
What's interesting about that, again, for those of you who don't know, I do have a history degree, is the fact that's nothing new. I mean, this has happened before. When television first came out, it was seen as a disposable entertainment, a disposable medium. And for the most part, the big television studios didn't record what they had put out. They didn't keep any type of recordings of the various TV shows they produced. They just literally threw them in the trash. Doctor Who fans are well aware of this fact with the early episodes of Doctor Who. But it was also other things like, for instance, they've just recently discovered a complete version of the original Casino Royale, which was broadcast on anthology drama series on one of the big 3 networks here in the United States, basically, and they've remastered it. It still looks terrible, though, just because, again, the original copies were thrown out and they found another copy somehow. This type of thing happens. If you go back to the golden age of television here in the United States, you can't watch these shows for the most part because the bed networks didn't keep the stuff. They just threw it out. And I think that's what the same thing you're seeing with video games is they don't recognize them as pieces of art. They're just disposable entertainment that should be just thrown out because it has no value.
Right. And I just looked this up to make sure, but one of our most important pieces of film ever, like historically, is the Fritz Lang, again, quote unquote, masterpiece, Metropolis. We can't watch that film. It's considered one of the most important movies ever, but there's no way to actually watch it as it was intended, or I think even as it was presented originally. We've got most of it, like we've recovered a lot of that movie, but it's just kind of lost to history at this point.
Well, part of the problem with that one is the fact, of course, the medium it was done on was film, cellulose, which decays over time. It actually becomes explosive, believe it or not.
If you want to see that actually happen, watch Inglourious Bastards, a film by Quentin Tarantino.
Believe it or not, the library actually did have, from the mass comm department, some old films that was kept in a locked cabinet, which was incredibly dangerous because it was starting to decay, and it was a huge flame hazard at the time and stuff like that. We don't have that anymore. One of the previous media librarians got rid of it, and the idea was, I guess we should have tried to archive it, but the truth is it's expensive to do, and there's very few people out there that can recover old archives of old cellulose.
Very, very difficult to back that stuff up, especially if you don't have the original prints.
Oh, I'll throw in another one for you, too, that's also in this field. The NASA files.
Oh, okay.
We've lost tons and tons of data from NASA because the old magnetic recordings of the data have decayed or they're no longer viable.
And that's one of those things that people like NASA, for them, it's like, here's some crap that we were, that we had archived. But for the public interest, that's super important. And you didn't have anyone actively finding ways of like, okay, I have a literal ton of information here. What do we need to actually back up? What's in the public interest? And for them, it's like, not really anything. And
well, I think that's simplifying the matter a little bit because
definitely.
One of the biggest problems with archival is it costs time and money. If people think, I can just give this to somebody and they can just stick it somewhere and it'll be fine. But no, as you mentioned before, material decays over time. As you mentioned with video games, the code needs to be changed and updated so people can still access it. So this is something that requires due diligence. It requires maintenance. It requires, again, time and money to archive stuff. Unfortunately, it's not necessarily something that's important for now. It might be something that's important for generations down the line, but how can we know that? And so a lot of times institutions like libraries have to make decisions about where their money goes. And unfortunately, archives is one of the places that tends to be on the cutting block a lot.
Unfortunately, yeah. I mean, luckily for us, ours isn't. We have a fantastic archival program.
You say that. How many government documents have you thrown out?
Well, I plead the fifth on this one.
Again, the thing with government documents, though, is there are places that do have lots of time and money and grants to actually archive that material. So it is archived somewhere. It's just no longer archived at our institution.
A humongous amount of those fedial. Wow, I just created one word from Twins. The physical books have mostly been archived or saved in some way, and since those are public domain, they belong to the public, there's really nothing stopping anyone from hosting that on their own. That leads to what I think is a much more interesting side of the archival process, which is fans of the medium who back that up on their own in not even arguable, actual legal gray areas at best. And we hate to say that as an institution whose part of our job is to archive, but like with video games, you have emulation. You have people who are able to completely recreate those original data files, although not in the most perfect of ways, not in ways that are generally intended by the creators. But right now, film, video games, all this stuff, it's very much not promoted in any way to create these backups. In some cases, that's the only way that they're going to survive the weathering of time.
And again, that's always been true. Again, these old films, you mentioned before the Metropolis films, I mentioned Doctor Who. A lot of these older type materials are only around nowadays because there was some independent collector who maintained them. A lot of the Doctor Who stuff, there was somebody who held up a camera up to the television set and actually recorded it that way. So,
The other problem with that is publishers or authors or whoever who want a specific version of their creation to be preserved that doesn't capture what made that particular title intriguing. Well, I've got one really good example, and that's George Lucas. Nobody wants those enhanced editions, those digital special edition monstrosities that he's created.
And by no one, he means people he doesn't agree with, by the way.
Okay, I challenge listeners here to come to me personally and explain to me why you would rather have those special editions than the original, because I think that those are misguided in a lot of ways. But there's also, like Disney has their streaming service now. They just put out The Simpsons. What they thought people wanted was an HD widescreen remaster of The Simpsons, this incredible historical program that's been going on and kind of reflecting America's society for, 40 years now? And the first thing people said was, why did you crop this? There are a dozen jokes per frame that are now gone forever because you preserved it incorrectly. And it took them months to finally say, okay, fine, we'll upload the originals because that's what you wanted. And in a lot of ways, it's the fans of that medium who decide how something should or needs to be preserved. And here at the library, that's kind of what we do. We listen to the general idea, the feedback of what our students or what our patrons want to see.
I will say, though, that we do have conflicts there, though. One of the problems with archival in the way, again, apparently I'm going to become devil's advocate for this podcast throughout the entire thing. Anything Chris says, I'll say, actually, no, I'm not trying to do that. Here I am being
the extremist.
I'm not trying to do that. But one of the conflicts that's coming up in the archival work is you have the needs of our current students as opposed to the needs of our alumni.
Right. That's a big one too, because we are just an academic library. We are here for the students who are attending our college right now.
And so a lot of times we'll get alumni in who said nothing must change. Everything must stay the way it is. It must be how I remembered it when I went to school there 20, 30 years ago. And we have to keep moving forward sometimes. So there are things that we had here at some time, like for instance, at one point we had a collection of memorabilia of the Midwestern State University. That collection was eventually, because again, the students here didn't care about it, was added to a scanned database that the students can then go through at their leisure to pull things up in a medium. And that's what they wanted. But the alumni were very upset we didn't have it up on a wall somewhere like we used to, that they now had to go to a computer to look at it. And again, that's have the conflicts we have a lot here, is we have the wants and desires of people who no longer go to school here versus the wants and desires of people who do go to school here. And invariably, we'll come down with the people who do go to school here as opposed to those who have gone to school here in the past, unfortunately.
In that regard, every student who goes here at some point is going to be an alumni, and we can't make everyone happy.
So just let you know, those of you who are students here, if you do come back in 20 years, you will be upset by the way things have changed.
Yeah, I mean, I think I brought that up last time, but the first thing that I did here was weed the government documents collection. It went down from, I would say, literally half of the first floor to one single range of shelves. Maybe even half a range of shelves at this point. And that's just because that's the nature of it. We weren't really serving those physical books, but we did have a need for them online. So we decided, okay, well, we'll keep what we really need here, and then everything else will be served through our online databases.
Actually, the only person who was upset about that was a librarian who'd worked here for 50 years.
Yeah. So far, no one's. Well, no, I've had some students who needed some of the codes.
Yeah, Code of Federal Regulations.
Yeah, regulations and stuff, and their professor had specifically wanted them to find the book, but that's one class that we get that question for once every 3 semesters or something. So that is still served online, so that's where we had to go in that direction.
And again, it comes back to the archival type thing. It costs us time and money to keep a physical copy. So if we can keep an online copy, we do. Now, again, you get into the conflict again about how people learn and how people look at things. I will admit, going and flipping through, at least when it comes to law, just because the way law books work, it's much easier to work with a physical copy of a law book than it is to use a legal database or a PDF of the law book, just because it just works better in that case. Because it's hard to do searches. Well, people go, well, you just do a word search. Well, with legal books, there's a huge problem with doing just word searches.
Yeah, Control F one word and you get like 3,000 results back.
Yeah,
that's
yeah.
difficult. But I totally agree with you there, and that's a matter that I think is like future generations are going to have to figure out how best to utilize those electronic sources. And I think over time with technology, that could very easily be taken care of. But as it is now, like we kind of have to live in the moment and what we have given to us.
Well, that was an interesting topic, Griff, that we went through right there.
Yeah, drift is putting it mildly.
Well, we did talk about archivals, which is interesting. But I think we need to get back on topic and try to narrow down a list of talking about archives of public domain films that are archived that we can watch for our Halloween movie madness.
Sure thing. And yeah, we talked about a few of these last time, like Night of the Living Dead, one of my favorite films of all time. The only reason that's even in the public domain is because the distributor forgot to put the copyright notice on the film. And back in those days, just forgetting to put the notice on the movie meant that it immediately became public domain. Like that movie has a director, it has a distributor, it has a producer. A cataloging error has given that film to the public for all time.
Okay, let's throw some stuff out there. We want to try to stick with probably with the Halloween motif, maybe?
Yeah, definitely.
Okay. How about the original Silent Phantom of the Opera?
I've not seen it. Everyone knows it. You know, it's 1925. That's like the beginning of film almost.
Let's throw that out there and see if anyone wants to watch that.
Looking on the list, right underneath it, Plan 9 from Outer Space. The problem that I have with that is that's going to be a lot of us scratching our heads, a lot of people who have not seen it just kind of looking at it with horrified curiosity, and the people who actually know the background of the film being amused by what's happening.
I will point out we are supposed to be doing a reaction video, so that and Manos Hands of Fate are good reaction videos, basically.
Yeah, Manos the Hands of Fate is also in the public domain. That's a film that I have not seen ever, aside from clips, and that is one that I know I would have a lot of what is happening moments with.
It's just incredibly boring, most of it, actually. That's the reason I don't really want to watch it again, because it's just really, I mean, it's terrible, but it is funny, but it's also very, very boring. Again, I'm going to throw out the Dave and Max Fletcher cartoons of Popeye and Superman.
Sure, yeah. Those, I have not seen those in ages. I think those would be interesting to watch.
We could do the original Star is Born.
Oh, yeah, especially since that new one came out. It was pretty big, wasn't it?
I'm going through actually chronologically from the oldest to the newest.
Yeah, I'm just flipping through them.
I know.
Reefer Madness.
Reefer's Madness, yeah, we can throw that on there.
I had no idea that was public domain, but it makes sense.
Let us also think about maybe doing a Christmas one sometime, because I do see that both It's a Wonderful Life and Santa Claus versus the Martians are on this list. So
that would be a great idea. In keeping with the horror motif, the original Last Man on Earth, which is based on I Am Legend by Matheson. That's
again,
on
it's
this
Vincent
list.
Price. It's and he's not playing up campy at all too. So it's really good. It's a really good Vincent Price horror film.
And then Little Shop of Horrors is also
Little Shop of Horrors. Actually, Little Shop of Horrors has my vote for it because it's a comedy. It's light. Well, it's not that light. People are being fed to a giant praying mantis. But I think it's a musical. I think that one we'd have a lot to talk about or to make fun of, where it's still kind of horror based.
Sure. A lot of these films I have not seen. I haven't really heard of them too much. So I think that would be a case of we'd all be learning something. I think we'd all be expanding our horizons by actually seeing a lot of these. White Zombie, really? Jeez, I had no idea that was...
White Zombie, it's not that great. Okay. House on the Haunted Hill, though. William Castle,
Ooh.
Great. Really cheesy.
My concern with this is that these movies, barring a few, are 1960s and previous and prior to that. They're all pretty old. And as we know, current generations don't really like to look back on these classical items unless they are like hugely influential. I heard someone on a podcast a few years ago say that Casablanca doesn't age well. So I think that you're going to have a few people who will turn their nose up just based on the age of this, and I hope not. I have more faith in our patrons than that.
My college roommate refused to watch anything that was in black and white.
So we wouldn't watch Eraserhead?
Eraserhead was in black and white, so no, he would not watch Eraserhead.
What a bummer. That just makes me sad. But yeah, I understand it. I've heard that plenty of times. I heard people who say they would not watch letterboxed films, which that also kind of turns my head about, you know.
Okay. So sticking with the Halloween theme, This is the list I have. House on Haunted Hill, Little Shop of Horrors, Last Man on Earth, Night of the Living Dead, Phantom of the Opera, Plan 9 from Outer Space, and Manos: The Hands of Fate.
I can't really think of anything that I would add to that based on just this list here. We need to probably see exactly how it would work, but I guess we could also put A Boy and His Dog.
I'd save that one because that's not necessarily a horror one. That's more of a schlocky science fiction type film.
Okay.
I didn't put in Reefer Madness. I didn't put in Star is Born. I didn't put in Poppy versus Superman because I figured it would stick with the horror theme for Halloween. Maybe
that's just because of the age I grew up in, but I always associate the post-apocalyptic nuclear wasteland as horror. But I guess for most people, yeah, that would just be another setting. That would be like a genre in its own.
Oh, Top of Returns also is another film. I've watched old films, so again, I'm sure Chris is going, "What? What's Top of Returns?" Don't worry about it. It's a comedy. It's pretty good.
I wish that I could say otherwise, but yeah, that's true. I'm a millennial. I don't know much.
Or I'm a Gen Xer, which means that I was stuck in front of a TV set from an early age. Here, this will entertain you for enough time.
Now, I believe. Let's see. Is it not The Man with the Golden Arm that inspired David Lynch, or
possibly?
Am I thinking of something else? I'm looking at this list and I'm not even thinking about horror because I don't know how we could actually improve on that list. And again, the students would be voting on those to find which ones they like the most.
Yeah, I think that's a good list. I mean, we could throw in like stuff like The Brain That Wouldn't Die, and but it's not that good of a film either.
Yeah, we're fine with Camp. I am 100% fine with Camp. I saw Plan 9 from Outer Space in a theater. That's definitely not below me.
Yeah, we'll go with that as our list then, probably, I think. That's 7 films. We'll give it out to the media librarian to put up on our social media and see what people will vote for as far as stuff goes. Because you have a horror comedy musical with Little Shop of Horror. You have very campy films like House on the Hill. You have a very cheap, shot on a very limited budget, Manos: The Hands of Fate. You have Plan 9 from Outer Space, which is also like House on the Hill, very, very campy. You have classics like Night of the Living Dead and Phantom of the Opera. Then you have what I think is an underrated Vincent Price film in The Last Man on Earth.
Okay, yeah, that sounds good then. Anything else you want to talk about with those?
Well, yeah, but that's more of the nuts and bolts. How are we going to manage to pull this off type of idea?
Oh, we'll have long discussions on that.
Yeah.
All right. So, was there any Q&A you wanted to bring up? Because we have a ton more questions on our lib answers here on our Q&A.
We covered the big ones, I think, last time on our initial run, where we basically sat down and talked about a lot of the questions that the students are having right now in the library.
Would you like to talk about TexShare? That's one of our questions on our Q&A. It only has 5 views right now, but the fact that people are looking at it, this is also something that was talked about in my graduate course, and there were quite a few people who had not actually ever heard of TexShare as a service.
The reason TexShare is probably coming up is because you have a lot of people who are, because of COVID, online right now, and they are probably not here in Wichita Falls. What TexShare is specifically is it's a consortium of Texas schools. And now these could be, Texas schools and also public libraries as well, actually, I take that back. But anyone who basically receives money in some way from the state of Texas, that includes your public universities, that includes your public schools, that includes your community colleges, that includes high schools to some extent as well. They all are part of, well, not all of them, but they can choose to become part of a consortium that shares materials. Now, what does this mean for the students? It means that if you live, for instance, in Dallas, there are universities there in Dallas, or there are libraries there in Dallas, public libraries, or that are part of this consortium. Not only do they allow us to share materials, so not only can we pull materials from different universities and stuff like that to help you in your research, but it also means that student can go to that local library and be able to use some of their facilities. One of the problems is every institution creates their own laws about who can use what, who has access to what. But it means that usually it means at least the student go into the local library. If they have one of these TexShare cards that said that they have signed up for the program, that MSU is a member of the TexShare program, they can go into their local public library or their local university library. And even though they're not a student there, or even if they may not have a library card for the public library, they can still check out materials from that institution. It also means a lot of times that it will also help us deliver stuff to students as well. We can deliver some things through the mail to the students, but also helps if they say, well, I'm a member of TexShare, and I usually go down to my local public library, and they're a member of TexShare. What we can actually do then in that case is we can actually ship the material to that library, and then the student can go pick up the material from our library at their own little local library as well. I mean, there's a lot of things we can do with the system.
Yeah, and even our interlibrary loan program uses TexShare as a courier.
We've had this happen before where a student will say, oh, I've got overdue books, but I went back to Houston and I don't really want to drive all the way back up to Wichita Falls, just drop off these books I still have checked out. And we'll tell them, oh, that's okay, just head down to the University of Houston, tell them this and this and this, and go to their interlibrary loan department, drop off the books, they'll send them back to us.
I'm going to assume that means that they would still accrue late fees based on how fast or how slowly it takes to get here.
If it was overdue at the time, yeah, it would.
But that's a better option.
Way for them to avoid having to drive all the way back to Wichita Falls. They use the courier system that basically all of the large schools and libraries are part of, that we ship stuff around to each other on a daily basis. It's a way that someone living in Houston can still use our resources and get those materials in a more timely manner than they would usually get them.
Yeah, and I'm looking at the policy right now on our Q&A, and in all honesty, there's really not a whole lot that TexShare members don't have access to. I mean, the only thing I'm seeing here that they can't even check out is media equipment. But
these are our policies, by the way. This is the policies for someone coming in from another institution into our library, and they'd be the policies as far as what they could do in our library. Again, every institution is going to have different policies as far as that goes.
Yep, all libraries are different. Yeah, do you want to go over how they sign up for that? I mean, it's really, it's not a difficult process at all, but you know, that might be something that they're not aware of.
The easiest thing to do, again, if you are a student that is not here in Wichita Falls, and you want to get your TexShare card and set up the TexShare program, the easiest thing to do is to contact our circulation manager. His email is available off of our website. If you go down to departments and click on circulation, Jason Brazzini is our current manager. Send him an email, and he will have you send the requisite information that he needs from you, and he will probably mail you a card in the mail. That card will then allow you access to go into your local library and check out materials. Now, I will say something else. The card, I think, lasts for 1 year only. You have to renew it, so just keep that in mind.
That should be on the card, though, right? The renewal date?
Yeah, the renewal date is on it, but a lot of people don't actually read their cards.
Well, I mean, who reads anymore?
Yeah, no one reads. One of our biggest problems, we put up signs telling people stuff. They're like, oh, yeah, I didn't read that.
Well, speaking of reading, I think that's actually something that's very useful. That's very useful information. But speaking of reading, do you have any books you want to talk about before we close this out? Anything you'd like
The
to
sad
recommend?
thing is, yes, I did. When I went to bed last night, I said, yeah, I'll talk about that. And for the life of me, I can't think of what it was. I think it may have been Dune. I think it may have been that we've already talked about before. For those who haven't read it before, I've actually had this argument before with one of the literature professors here on campus. I think Dune is the ultimate American, or actually I take that back, English science fiction novel. I think it epitomizes the height of what science fiction should achieve or try to aim for as a genre. And I think it represents, if not the best, then the icon that is science fiction in the English language.
I don't think there are too many people who would disagree with you on that.
There's a math professor on campus who would argue it should be Ender's Game, which I won't go into.
A math professor, you say?
Yeah.
Well, okay. For a math guy, I guess that might be true, but for people talking about literature, talking about fiction, I'm going to take the high ground on this one and say I'm just going to throw my hat in with Dune. I think Ender's Game is kind of that leads a little too much into young adult like pulp.
I gotcha.
Yeah.
I don't want to touch it because of the controversies around the author Orson Scott Card.
Orson Scott Card's a jerk. No one will dispute that. Even the people who are involved with the making of the film, which flopped horrifically, have also said, "Yeah, we like the story. We don't really want to associate with Mr. Card, though."
And this is the point in the podcast where I'll remind our host that we do not want to get sued. So be very careful about what you say about celebrities on the podcast.
Okay, yes. Based on what I've seen in interviews, that's how things are going. Yeah, no, allegedly. That's just my opinion. That doesn't represent the university or the institution. That's just based on literally everything I've read about the guy. But yeah, no, Dune represents my ideal science fiction. You have tremendous world building, which spans galaxies, a history that is, I don't know, thousands, tens of thousands of years that are encompassed in just a few books. The greatest aspect of science fiction, though, to me at least, is the way that speculative, that a speculative piece of fiction can then be used to describe philosophical issues.
I will say I like it because of its influence. It's influenced everything from Warhammer 40K to Game of Thrones. So it's
everything.
I think it's a very highly influential. Before that, there was something known as Campbellian science fiction. And the idea of Campbellian science fiction is to promote the idea of science, that there is all science fiction should be a mystery where the person uses science and engineering to solve a problem. Herbert was one of the first guys to successfully, he wasn't the first one to try to do this, but to very successfully say, no, we can explore other things. He's talking more about ideas of history and philosophy.
Yeah, and leadership. Leadership's a huge aspect of that, and leadership, the nature of heroes on a
politics in general.
The great man, isn't that what the whole kind of idea behind Dune is, that there is always a great man who can lead a historical push,
which was a traditional historical way of teaching. It's gone out of favor nowadays. It is a way of representing history.
I wish that I remembered a lot of. I've only listened to the audiobook of Dune, and I will say usually I like to tell students, like, if you have audiobooks available to you, that might be a good way to absorb like longer material. I know for a fact that when I was an undergrad, I like to listen to music while I like played a video game or had something in the background, and I feel like if you absolutely have to distract yourself somehow, try to do something like an audiobook. That way you're still absorbing that material in some way. As for Dune, though, don't do that. Do not listen to the Dune audiobook. You need to read that. That is something that needs to be directly consumed.
I'll also mention this. A lot of people say, well, why do I have to watch it? There's a movie coming out. There's a David Lynch film. There's the miniseries that Sci-Fi Channel did. I'll just watch one of those instead. In most cases, again, I've actually had a professor tell me that the book is always better than the film, which is not true. I can name at least 3 films which are far better than the book. Usually, the book is going to be better. And in the case of Dune, there's so much subtlety. There's so much more detail in the book than you'll ever be able to capture in a miniseries or TV show.
Herbert likes to focus on multiple characters in one scene. He likes to really break down the thought processes. So it's not like your Game of Thrones where one chapter will be the perspective of one character, and so like there's an aspect of unreliability there. Dune presents very heavy philosophical topics through multiple perspective characters in one chapter, and sometimes in one paragraph. And it has to be told like that, otherwise that first book, the first part of the first book would be 500 pages long.
And the thing I always enjoyed about it is it's not black and white. It's multiple people. Each of them has their own agendas. The agendas are all conflicting with each other.
Well, I would say that Vladimir Harkonnen is an example of very, very dark black philosophically.
I think the Harkonnens get a bad rap in that. I think the Baron Harkonnen, he's presented as a villain. But I can make an argument for the Baron Harkonnen. Let me put it that way.
He has a desire. He has something he wants to accomplish, and it's not just because he's evil to be evil. It's because he's desperate to get the Harkonnen family back as like one of the leading powers in the galaxy or the universe. Dune has a gigantic setting, and the relationships between the families is one of the, I feel, less played up aspects of the books, but it's also very important.
But again, Chris, if a student here wanted to read the Dune book, how would they go about doing that? Using our library to find it.
They could go on our website on, I think you could reach it. I don't think you'd have to actually go into the. Okay, yeah, well, I guess you do. I was trying to find just the link to the library. Yeah, you go to msutexas.edu/library. You can go through the academics drop down on our homepage, on the MSU Texas homepage. And right underneath we have a big splash that shows like some brief COVID updates. You go to the library catalog, search Moffat Library, and just type in the word Dune.
So he's saying there's a little search box underneath the visuals. Just type in that search box Dune. You should pull up the various books, the DVDs that we have on it, and other materials.
I would also suggest very carefully looking at the title and the author. These books were not quite finished. I would say that you still get a very distinct story just by reading the original books printed by Frank Herbert. He did pass away right before the conclusion of the series, and arguably his intended ending is presented to us, but it was written by his son Brian Herbert. There's a lot of controversy surrounding the Brian Herbert books, and I would really suggest you think carefully before you actually dive into these, because they are not the intended style and writings of the Dune books. Dune 7 does not exist. It will never exist. And what Brian gave us is most likely not what Frank wanted. So just keep that in mind. A lot of the first results when searching for Dune are Brian Herbert.
Oh, but you also have George I'm going to mispronounce the name, Jodorowsky's Dune, which is a
Yeah.
fantastic documentary. Oh, that's such a good documentary.
Please watch Jodorowsky's Dune. That is, I don't think, listener, that you quite, even if we told you, you can't quite grasp the gravity of this failed film project.
This was the first attempt to make Dune into a film back in the 70s.
From I'd say controversial.
Very controversial.
Very controversial, abstract film director Alejandro Jodorowsky. This thing would have been, I kind of want to say a nightmare, but this thing would have been the most insane science fiction film that has ever existed. And because of its failure, I don't even want to call it a failure because of what it did. It led to the creation of a lot of careers, like
in film.
Was it in film, yeah.
Also stuff like Geiger and stuff like that, yeah.
H.R. Geiger was not that well known before this, I believe. He designed pretty much all of the concept art for this Dune film, went on to reuse a lot of that for Alien.
It also highlighted people like Chris Foss, who is one of the greatest science fiction illustrators of all time. Just fantastic. If you've seen his work, you know it because you're like, oh, wow.
Yeah. So we have that here in our library. If you'd like to check that out, I recommend it. As for the actual novel Dune, that will be on our third floor as shown by our catalog here. Third floor, the call number PS 3558.E63D8, and then the years that they were published. At some point, we could probably go over exactly how to read these call numbers and maybe what they all mean.
It's going to be hard to do that on a podcast. But just, if you want to get a hold of the books, type in Dune into that little search box, and the first thing that pops up is the two versions of Frank Herbert's Dune that we have available in the library. I was going to see if we have any online. There is some full text online. Let's see if any of it is anything to do with Dune. No, it's all about erosion during dust storms type stuff.
Well, okay. I think we have all of the books too, though. Is that correct?
I couldn't tell you off the top of my head. I don't know.
We look up Frank Herbert. Our search box is actually quite nice because you don't really need Boolean operators, and there are still a lot of library catalogs that you pretty much have to use Booleans, and that's searching through and, or, and not. For us, it's just type it in as you would.
We do. We have all the books.
Children of Dune, that's the third book. Dune Messiah, that's the second one. The original Dune, Chapter House Dune, which is book 6. Heretics of Dune, I think that's 5. And God Emperor. No, God Emperor is book 4.
Mm-hmm.
God Emperor is also the book that most people will tell you is the best Dune book. Some people will tell you it is the best science fiction novel of all time.
You also get the same number of people telling you God Emperor of Dune is the worst science fiction book of all time. It's the worst thing in the entire series.
There are multiple people I have seen who say that God Emperor of Dune is liquid garbage. It seems like the people who really, really love that book do in fact like adore it. There aren't a whole lot of people who hate it, but I have seen it, and the people who don't like that book really, really do not like it. The next best thing to reading it, I guess, would be I don't want to say the audiobook because like he invents his own language in this book. Not even like Tolkien's got his elven language. I mean, like he uses English words to create a lot of new concepts. And that was something that was lost on me entirely when I listened to the audiobook. I guess you could watch the sci-fi miniseries if you really don't want to wait for the Denis Villeneuve movie. It's not going to beat just reading the book because there is a lot there that is intended to be read.
Well, we've talked a lot about Dune. That was my book for the week. Do we want to mention what we want to try to address next week? We need to move along.
I think we'll talk about we can't really decide which films we want to decide on. We'll have an idea of the programs that we actually will have. We'll let you know how it is that we're going to deliver that to you, but we have some pretty good ideas.
So again, what do you want to do next week?
Well, Ryan, that's a good question. We'll probably have to edit this out, but I don't know.
Okay.
What are you
That's
thinking?
something we can, we'll worry about when we get there.
Yeah, we'll worry about that when we get there. That's going to be a big hiccup in recording these first few because we are going to be busy as all get out until the week right before this episode or the last episode goes live. So it's going to be difficult to gauge feedback, I think, and I don't want to start rocking the boat until we see exactly what it is people want to hear from us, or people maybe are getting annoyed by us talking about too much.
And you're assuming someone's going to listen to us too. It might just be people who work here in the building, but that's still feedback as well.
Yeah, we already had a little bit of feedback earlier saying that we are too chatty, which is why we talked about Dune for 20 minutes.
Yeah, it is.
You can't tell me how chatty I am. I'll show you.
And with that, I think we're out of time.
We are indeed. Thank you so much for listening. If you have questions, comments, concerns, or just a little bit of feedback, make sure you email us. How can they email us?
The easiest thing is to email library@msutexas.edu.
And they can also contact us by phone if there are any questions that you have, any reference questions that you need. Our phone number on the website is 940-397-4000. That will take you directly to our reference phone. Is that correct?
I think that takes you directly to the voicemail direction type thing.
Yeah, the directory. That's correct. But that's still a good phone number to reach us at. That's what we have on our website. So we're open to chat at any time as long as the building's open. As long as we're here, we'd be happy to talk to you.
Okay.
All right. Bye, everyone.